Hi everyone, my name's Jameis, and I'm working on my 1974 Mercury 650. It's a 3-cylinder with a Type 3 CDI ignition. I'm going to replace my distributor housing. The reason I'm replacing my distributor housing is the triggers are part of the housing. So if your trigger goes bad on one of these models, you have to replace the entire housing. They're usually remanned by CDI, which is who this is remanned by. CDI also makes the aftermarket ignition module, which you can see in some of my other videos. And they make a lot of really great components. I bought this from MarineEngineParts.com, and I'll go ahead and include a link to that down in the description. It's already disassembled. It took me a while to disassemble it, so if you want to see how to disassemble it, just watch this and just go from the back and back to the forward. It should help. There's some other great resources on how to assemble and disassemble this. I'll include it down below, but there was a little bit about this distributor that made it a little tricky. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing I want to do is I want to install my lower bearing. This interacts with my shaft here, and it's what allows the it's not called a pickup. It's what allows the rotor to turn. Go ahead and give yours a spin. If it feels smooth all the way around, I'd just reuse it. Replacements for these are like 50 for the lower and 20 for the upper. I don't remember exactly which is which, but it's about 75 for both. Because mine are good, I'm just going to go ahead and reuse them. So we're going to put that down there in the bottom and just work it in a little bit. It may take a little bit of pressure. Feel free to go ahead and put grease on this thing, because it's going to be coated in grease when we're done with it anyway. Next thing we want to do is there's a snap ring to hold in our lower bushing, or lower bearings. So I'm using snap ring pliers. You don't have to use snap ring pliers. You can use regular pliers. But I'm going to go ahead and install the snap ring. You hear that nice auditory click. If you look down inside of here, you'll see there's a groove right in there. There's a groove right in there a snap ring fits inside of. So after we got the snap ring, the next part we need to install is the new distributor shaft. Or old one, depending on how you took yours apart. I'm just going to pull all these components off. So installing this can be a little bit tricky. We have the shaft. We have the disc that goes on the shaft. And this disc is actually for the pickups. And you'll see there's a little notch cut out right here on the shaft. Little notch right there on the disc, so that the two will always lock together like that once it's installed, and the disc cannot move independently of the shaft. See if we can move the camera any closer. The disc cannot move independently of the shaft. So on top of that, we have one washer. It's kind of tapered. We want the tapered side to go to the top. On top of that, there's another really tiny flat washer. And all of that has to go up and into this bearing. Let's go ahead and get started on that. It's a little bit of a complicated process because of the way this little piece has to go through first. Make sure we can see it and what I'm doing on camera. Yeah, we can. Just gonna make sure there's no gunk left on this bad boy. Go ahead and clean anything that's on the wheel off. So there is some gunk on it. I'm not sure what it is. I don't know if this gunk was on it when it came out, or if it happened sitting on my table. I'm hoping for the first, but you know, whatever happened, happened. Alright, so we'll go ahead and lip that on there, put our washers on there, and our tiny washer on top of that. Here comes the tricky part. I need to lip this little ring to that piece there. There we go. And as long as everything's still connected to that shaft, go ahead and push it on up through. Line up the shaft with the ring. So now the shaft and the ring move together, and they can't move independently of each other. Alright, the next step's looking here right on this side. And what we're going to need is we got this little shaft that goes down there. And we have a nut that goes on top of that. That nut just screws into place. I'm using a 3/4 inch socket. I'm just going to tighten that nut down. You don't have to put too much pressure on this, but just put enough on there that it's not going to come loose. And when I was taking that nut off of there, I did have a lot of issues with it. As you can see, there's some score marks down here, right there. That's where I used channel locks on it. So before I learned how much this part cost, this part cost about $200. So I'm not too terribly inclined to replace the whole thing. If we got the nut in there, then we have another set of bearings to go on the top. This is going to be our upper bearings. You can go ahead and spin yours. My upper bearings, there's a little bit of drag in these, but once it gets moving it's fine, so I'm not too worried about that. I'm just going to set the upper on there and slide it on down. There you go. You don't want to apply too much pressure sliding this down. When you're doing disassembly, you can see right here there's a hole that goes in under the bearing. You can push up directly on the bearing, push the bearing out to the top for disassembly. So, next component we're going to need is the bracket that holds it in place. I have no clue what this bracket is called. Before we install this bracket, there's a little ring that goes on the bottom. Make sure that ring goes on there. And then this bracket just kind of slides in here and it just sits there. It'll be dry spinning it around. That's okay. When you're at this point, if you're disassembling and you already have the top part and you're down to this bracket, that's where you want to be. Alright, this next part is where I found it tricky, and it took me a while to figure this out. In the top of here, there are several rings. One, I shouldn't have bent those back down like that. Let me grab the pliers real quick. These rings that go through the top interlock. So we're going to have a lower ring. The one I have in my hand here, I'll show you in just a second. We're going to have a lower ring, this one. We're going to have an upper ring, the lower ring picks up through. And then there's little teeth in the top of this cap. And these little pins on the side of this lower ring are supposed to go up through the teeth on this cap. So I'm going to go ahead and just double check, make sure I'm still on camera. Yeah. So I'm going to put a ring with the little teeth thing in there. I'm going to put my upper ring in there. Now these are very malleable, so just be careful when you're taking them apart. It looks like I bent this one a little bit. I'm just going to bend it back. Alright, cool. So this cap just kind of screws on to the top Put it on there. I'm just going to start screwing it. So it may be difficult to screw this on. To get it off, actually, I'd use a pair of channel locks. Once you get the little rings in the middle removed, the top part should come easily, though. It looks like I'm having some difficulty getting it back on, so I'm going to use my channel locks again. Questionable if channel locks are the proper way to do this, but, you know, whatever gets the job done. And we just want to run this thing down here till it doesn't turn anymore. And remember, the way I'm assembling is just the exact opposite of disassembly. So if you're in the disassembly phase, what I'm doing, just do it backwards. You'd want to turn this until it doesn't turn anymore, because this is what holds the top of the distributor in place. Yeah, it's hard to get a grip on. It's really hard to get out of here too. Some of the other models don't have this bracket around it, which makes this a lot easier. What makes it a lot harder on this one. Now you can put your teeth on the inside of here if you want. I think the ones on here are too big. Too big to do this. You can put your teeth on the inside there if you want. Just be prepared. It will mar everything up. I tried running a screwdriver through there and beating it to get it to turn out. Yeah, it didn't work. Alright, so I got that fairly well down in there. As you can see, there's locking pin, locking pin, locking pin, locking pin. We want to pull those pins back up. Go ahead and lock the top of this into place. Now if I broke these pins out of here, I probably would want to replace them. The way you get these out is you just kind of hammer them down. That's how I got this thing apart. See if I can't turn this bad boy a little bit more. Nope, looks like that's all I'm getting. Alright, cool. So it's kind of hard to see this, but as a 4x4 falls over, it's kind of hard to see this, but I now have both those locking pins up and locked into the cap. When you're trying to take this apart, just go ahead and take those pins and push them down. They don't have to be all the way down, they just have to be lower than the cap right here. So if they're down to this ring, they're totally okay. Alright. After that, there's another tiny washer that goes in the top. You can take this last washer out at any point. Alright, cool. Now we have the top of the distributor. There's a little shim that holds that in place. Want to make sure we get that back in there. We'll just go ahead and put the shim in here. This shim's really important that you don't lose it. If you lose it, you might as well just give up on the whole motor. We've got the last little top. One last nut on top. And that's it. Make sure you grease it really good. But the pickups have been replaced. And this distributor is ready to go back into the boat. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll be able to upload a video of it running again here soon.